The United States once boasted castles spanning from sea to shining sea, massive brick and stone structures complete with turrets, battlements, and crenelated walls. These castles were mostly built during America's Gilded Age, and they were built to last. But why did barons of industry build castles when there was nothing to defend? And better yet, why have they mostly all vanished? Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's uncover America's lost castles. Starting in the 1850s, decades before the robber baron's heyday, imaginative builders tested the notion of living like European nobility. Pratt's Castle in Richmond, Virginia was one of the first. Completed in 1854 by architect William Abbott Pratt, this Gothic revival manor was perched atop Richmond's Gamble's Hill. Pratt modeled it after the estates of his Scottish ancestors, complete with crenelated towers, secret passages, a faux dungeon, and even trick features. Pratt could reportedly spy on guests through a painting's eyes. For over a century, Pratt's whimsical folly was a local landmark that even survived war, but progress eventually caught up. In 1957, a corporation purchased the hilltop, and despite preservationist pleas, Pratt's castle was demolished, replaced by a corporate office building. Today, only memories of its ironclad turrets attest to this early American castle. Around the same time, another castle-like home rose in upstate New York. Beginning in 1852, celebrated architect James Renwick Jr., designer of the Smithsonian Castle, drafted a 24-room Norman-style manor for Cornelius Longstreet in Syracuse. Longstreet's estate was soon sold to Alonzo Yates, giving the house its nickname Yates Castle. With its battlements and Gothic flair, Yates Castle presided over Syracuse's University Hill for decades. It later served as a medical school building, but by 1954, it too met the wrecking ball. Needing space to expand, sunny upstate medical center tore down Renwick's picturesque castle. Yates Castle's rise and fall foreshadowed the destiny of many American castles, ambitious beginnings, and endings dictated by changing times. After the Civil War, America's explosive wealth gave rise to the Gilded Age, and with it, a frenzy of castle building on a grand scale. In the 1880s and 1890s, millionaires competed to construct the most lavish mansions, especially in New York City. One pivotal moment came in 1882 on Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, when William K. Vanderbilt and his wife Alva unveiled their Petite Chateau. Designed by Richard Morris Hunt in the style of a French Renaissance chateau, this limestone mansion stood at Fifth Avenue and 52nd Street, and shocked polite society with its opulence. It cost around $3 million, the modern equivalent of nearly $100 million, and debuted with a legendary costume ball in March of 1883, where Alva entertained 1,000 guests in fancy dress. The Petite Chateau's steep slate roof, Gothic dormers, and carved stone facade introduced New York to true continental luxury. Indeed, it was one of the earliest French chateau-style homes of the city and inspired many copycats. For over 4 decades, the mansion symbolized the Gilded Age elite, but its prominence was not eternal. By the 1920s, Midtown Manhattan's prime real estate was more valuable for commerce than single-family palaces. After William Vanderbilt's passing, his heirs sold the Petite Chateau to a developer in 1926, and it was demolished shortly after, its stone walls making way for a retail building. Today, an office tower at 665th Avenue occupies the site, leaving only photographs of the mansion's grand stair and ballroom as evidence that Petite Chateau ever existed. Not to be outdone by his younger brother, Cornelius Vanderbilt II built an even larger castle on Fifth Avenue. In 1883, Cornelius, the richest of William H. Vanderbilt's children, began constructing a 5-story chateauesque mansion at Fifth Avenue and 57th Street, intending to surpass William's Petite Chateau in size and splendor. Designed by George B. Post and Richard Morris Hunt in red brick and limestone, the castle was completed in 1883 with 50 rooms, then greatly expanded in 1893 to a 130-room colossus occupying an entire city block. It became, and remains, the largest private residence ever built in New York City. Its French castle-inspired design featured corner turrets, steep roofs, and ornate gables, a palace fit for royalty on Millionaires Row. Cornelius enjoyed the home only a few years before his passing, but his widow Alice lived there into the 1920s. By then, Fifth Avenue's fashionable residences were steadily being replaced by commercial buildings, and the upkeep on a 130-room mansion was impractical. Alice Vanderbilt finally sold the estate in 1926 for $7 million. The new owners promptly razed the Vanderbilt Castle later that year, clearing the prized corner for Bergdorf Goodman department store. What had been the grandest home in New York was thus gone, sacrificed to modern retail, with even the New York Times lamenting its demise as one of the great tragedies of American residential architecture. The castle building craze was not confined to New York. In the same era, other American cities saw their own magnates emulating European grandeur. Chicago, for instance, got its very own castle on Lakeshore Drive. Officially known as the Potter Palmer Mansion, just about everyone of the day called it Palmer Castle. Completed in 1885 for retail tycoon Potter Palmer and his socialite wife Bertha, this massive house was the largest private residence Chicago had ever seen. Architects Henry Ives Cobb and Charles Frost give it a distinct Norman Gothic style with brownstone turrets, crenelated parapets, and even minaret-like pinnacles. Inside, the Palmer's mansion boasted a 3-story central hall under a glass dome, multiple themed rooms, a Louis XVI salon, an Indian parlor, a Moorish room laden with perfumes, and a grand ballroom adorned with priceless art. The couple entertained U.S. presidents and European nobility there, solidifying Chicago's Gold Coast as a bastion of wealth. Yet by mid-century, Palmer's castle too fell victim to change. After Bertha Palmer passed away, her son sold the mansion in 1928. It went through other hands and stood vacant in the 1940s until finally in 1950 it was demolished, replaced by 2 high-rise apartment buildings that now house hundreds of families. A few bits of architectural salvage and paintings were saved, but Chicago's mightiest castle itself vanished, marking the end of an era on Lakeshore Drive. Wealthy Americans in what might be considered smaller cities today also built their own castles during the Gilded Age. In Cleveland, Ohio, financier Sylvester T. Everett constructed a baronial home on Euclid Avenue's Millionaires Row, which was often cited as America's most beautiful neighborhood. Constructed from 1883 to 1887 and designed by architect Charles Schweinfurth, the Everett Mansion was a massive Richardsonian Romanesque pile of sandstone with towering turrets and a fortress-like presence. It was reportedly the most expensive home ever built in Cleveland, filled with elaborate woodwork and art. But as Cleveland's millionaires decamped to suburbs in the early 20th century, Euclid Avenue's great houses fell out of fashion. Everett's castle barely lasted 50 years. It was razed in 1938, and its site turned into a mere parking lot. The fate of the Everett House was sadly common. By the 1960s, almost all of Cleveland's Millionaires Row mansions were gone, remembered only in photographs. Even in the developing Midwest, newly rich industrialists could not resist castle-like estates. In Minneapolis, flour milling baron William D. Washburn built Fair Oaks, a 37-room mansion so grand that locals called it the Castle on the Hill. Completed by 1884 at the height of the Gilded Age, Fair Oaks sat on a 10-acre landscape park and cost over $1 million, an eye-popping sum on the frontier. Its interior was reportedly more palace than home. Onyx fireplaces, marble floors, stained glass windows, tapestries, and carved exotic woods decorated every surface. The mansion even featured an elevator to whisk guests to the billiard room, a true novelty in the 1880s. Yet like many Gilded Age fancies, Fair Oaks outlived its usefulness. Washburn's heirs did not want the enormous house. In fact, none of his 6 surviving children chose to live there. Seeing the writing on the wall, Washburn donated the estate to the city, hoping it might serve as an art museum or park. After years of costly maintenance, demolition crews were summoned in 1924, and the castle was torn down to make way for a public park. Other mid-American cities saw similar chapters unfold. In Columbus, Ohio, a splendid 12,000 square foot mansion was built from 1886 to 1888 for Mary L. Frisbee, the widowed heiress of a hardware merchant. Constructed in Romanesque Revival style with thick stone arches and a prominent tower, it later became known as the Schumacher Mansion after its second owner, Frederick W. Schumacher. This Columbus castle included elaborate interior decor and a vast art collection. Schumacher even filled it with fine paintings and sculptures, many of which he loaned to the local art museum. The mansion stood proudly on East Broad Street for over 70 years, but by the late 1950s, it too was a relic amid a changing city. After Schumacher's death in 1957, no private buyer could maintain the aging 40-room edifice. It was demolished in 1961, and eventually an apartment building rose on its lot. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., also boasted a bona fide castle in the Gilded Age. In 1889, Senator John B. Henderson and his influential wife, Mary Foote Henderson, built an imposing Romanesque mansion on 16th Street atop Meridian Hill. Locals dubbed it Boundary Castle as it stood near the old city boundary at Florida Avenue. Constructed of red Seneca sandstone with 4 stories of towers and turrets, the castle commanded a view of downtown Washington. Mary Henderson, a formidable civic leader, envisioned the area as a grand embassy district and used her castle as both a home and salon for the powerful. She entertained congressmen, Supreme Court justices, foreign diplomats, even hosting the likes of Andrew Carnegie, under carved wood ceilings and stained glass windows in her castle's Great Hall. Mary was a progressive spirit, but also a consummate city builder. She even persuaded Congress to create Meridian Hill Park across from her home to beautify the neighborhood. After Mary's death in 1931, however, Henderson Castle quickly declined. The property went unsold and was briefly converted into a quirky swim and tennis club in 1937, complete with a pool in the former grand parlors and a boarding house upstairs. This unfortunately led to rowdy parties that annoyed the neighbors, especially the Myers family. The Myers bought the property in 1941 just to stop the nuisance. By 1948, the castle was vacant and deteriorating, and its contents were auctioned off for a pittance. In January 1949, the once proud Boundary Castle was demolished with little fanfare. The hilltop stood empty for nearly 30 years until a townhouse complex was built in the late 1970s. Fittingly, part of Henderson Castle's old stone wall and gate still stands along 16th Street as a ghostly reminder of Washington's lost castle. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea of building a personal castle had spread beyond major cities. In seaside resorts and small towns, eccentric and visionary millionaires constructed some of the most whimsical castles in American history, many of which enjoyed only brief lives. Consider Newport, Rhode Island, summer playground of the rich. Amid Newport's refined cottages, ex-governor Charles W. Lippett decided to build a literal fortress. In 1899, he built Breakwater, a sprawling red brick castle on Newport's cliffs, complete with turrets and a crenelated tower that loomed over the coastline. Architect Robert H. Robinson's design was heavy and fortress-like, a far cry from Newport's perfectly manicured estates. The formidable appearance and perceived poor taste of Lippett's castle drew scorn, none more famous than author Edith Wharton, who summered next door. Wharton abhorred the massive masonry mansions taking over Newport's shore. She called them white elephants. Breakwater, built directly across from Wharton's own house, so offended her sensibilities that she sold her home and left Newport entirely. Lippett enjoyed his castle for only a couple of decades. When he passed in 1924, his son promptly demolished Breakwater, figuring the property would sell more easily without the ungainly castle on it. Indeed, in 1926, the renowned architect and Newport's summer resident, John Russell Pope, purchased the estate and built a toned-down home called the Waves on the foundations of Breakwater. Thus, Newport's turreted oddball vanished, living on only in old photographs. In the small town of Methuen, Massachusetts, a Gilded Age magnate created a fairy tale castle with a less than fairy tale ending. Charles H. Tenney, a hat manufacturer turned banker, commissioned a grand estate called Greycourt in 1890. By 1892, rising on a 75-acre hilltop parcel, stood Tenney's Castle, a sprawling, multi-turreted mansion of gray stone designed by Carrere and Hastings, the architects later famous for the New York Public Library. For a time, Greycourt was the pride of Methuen and the summer retreat of the Tenney family, but Tenney died in 1919 and his son offered the castle and estate as a gift to the town. In a twist of fate, the town initially refused the generous gift due to fears of maintenance cost. Instead, the property went to a Catholic religious order which used the castle as a monastery and later as a treatment center. By the 1970s, the castle sat largely empty, and then tragedy struck. In the 1970s, an arson fire gutted Greycourt's wooden interiors. The once majestic stone walls stood ruinous on the hill. Today the site is known as Greycourt State Park, where visitors can wander among the low stone remnants of Tenney's castle and imagine its former glory. Linden Towers in Menlo Park, California was the lavish country estate of silver baron James C. Flood, built in the late 1870s at the height of the Gilded Age. Linden Towers was crowned by a 150-foot tower and had encompassed at least 40 rooms equipped with modern luxuries like an early elevator. Flood spared no expense on opulence. The interiors boasted rare hardwood paneling, marble fireplaces, 18-foot coffered ceilings with Italian frescoes, and stained glass windows, exemplifying Victorian extravagance. Flood and his family used Linden Towers mainly as a summer retreat until his passing in 1889, after which the mansion became his widow's and daughter's primary residence. By the 1930s, however, this once glittering castle was deemed a bygone relic by the Flood heirs. The family auctioned off its sumptuous furnishings and in the mid-1930s had the house demolished, closing the book on one of California's most opulent estates. Today only the brick perimeter walls and grand iron gates of Linden Towers remain, quietly marking the site where James Flood's palace once stood. Now, not all American castles were built in the 19th century. The early 20th century, even the Jazz Age, saw a few final flamboyant castles go up, often tinged with romance and folly. One legendary example was Beacon Towers, constructed around 1917 on Long Island's North Shore by Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. Alva, the former Mrs. William K. Vanderbilt, was by then remarried and immensely wealthy in her own right. She commissioned a Gothic fantasy castle overlooking the Long Island Sound, a building so fantastic that many believe it inspired F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Beacon Towers truly looked like something from a storybook. It was bright white, with high parapets, a 150-foot-high turret, a moat and drawbridge, all the works. Designed by Hunt and Hunt, sons of the Petite Chateau's architect, it combined elements of Spanish Alcazars, medieval French Chateau, and the whimsy straight from illuminated manuscripts. Alva Belmont enjoyed her dreamy castle for only about a decade. In 1927, she sold Beacon Towers to media mogul William Randolph Hearst, who made some alterations, raising the roofline and changing the windows. Hearst in turn unloaded the property in 1942. By then, the age of maintaining private castles was long over, and Beacon Tower's fate was sealed. It was demolished in 1945, only 28 years after it was built, and the land was subdivided for more modest homes. To this day, scattered remnants like the Gatehouse and Carriage House hide among suburban lawns in Sands Point, New York. Over in Massachusetts, Northfield Chateau was a 99-room summer home built in 1903 for New York financier Francis Robert Schell. Renowned architect Bruce Price, designer of Quebec's Chateau Frontenac, styled this Massachusetts mansion after a French chateau, complete with fanciful turrets, gables, and eclectic Gothic details that lent it a fairy tale grandeur. Schell, drawn to Northfield by evangelist D.L. Moody's nearby seminary, chose the location for its inspirational setting and originally christened the estate Burnham House, a nod to Scotland's Burnham Wood to reflect the romantic influence behind its design. He went so far as to reshape the landscape to suit his vision, damming a brook to create a picturesque lake and even relocating neighboring houses, all to evoke the Scottish scenery he loved. For 25 years, the Shells summered in their castle-like retreat, but after Schell's passing in 1928, his grieving widow refused to set foot in it again. The idle castle soon fell into disrepair and was eventually sold to the Northfield School for Girls, which utilized the grand building for special events, including the school's prom. Ultimately, maintenance of the sprawling property proved impractical. By 1963, the structure was deemed too unsound to save and was demolished, ending its 6-decade run as a Northfield landmark. At the same time Northfield Chateau was being built, construction at Gildysart in Deal, New Jersey was underway. It was the estate of Daniel O'Day, an Irish-born oil magnate who was instrumental in John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil empire. In 1903, O'Day invested part of his fortune to create this 85-acre seaside domain, named Gildysart after his hometown in County Clare. At its center stood a 64-room mansion designed in Grand Tudor Revival style, complete with half-timbered facades and a 6-story tower that commanded views of the Atlantic coast. The landscape grounds featured all the trappings of a turn-of-the-century castle, sweeping lawns, formal gardens, stables, and arbored walkways, befitting one of the largest and most lavish homes in New Jersey at the time. After O'Day's passing in 1906, the estate was purchased by businessman William P. Anelt in 1914 and was rechristened Anelt House or Anelt Hall in honor of its new owner. For 2 decades, the mansion remained a focal point of elite social life in Deal until disaster struck on an early summer morning in June of 1935. A massive fire broke out and engulfed the wooden manor, reducing Gildysart to ruins. The North Shore of Long Island had yet another castle, one that lasted far longer until very recently. This was in Envato, a gargantuan Tudoresque mansion built from 1916 to 1920 for Nicholas and Genevieve Brady. The Bradys intended it as both a home and a place for connecting to their deep Catholic faith. Architect John T. Wyndham gave the 87-room mansion an Elizabethan Tudor Revival design, an eclectic blend of English manor and fortress with half-timbered gables, stone bays, and multiple chapels inside. Envato's sheer scale, over 72,000 square feet, made it the 7th largest home in America at one point. Its interior included formal wings for entertaining and separate quarters for the Brady's many charitable and religious activities. Even the future Pope Pius XII stayed there as a guest in 1936. When both Nicholas and Genevieve had passed, Envato was bequeathed to the Jesuit order. For decades, it served as the St. Ignatius Jesuit retreat house, a peaceful refuge that seemed to give Envato a permanent purpose. But by 2012, the Jesuits could no longer afford the upkeep on the aging castle. Despite community outcry and efforts by preservationists, Envato was sold to developers in 2013, and that year, this last of Long Island's true castles was demolished. Its ornate woodwork and one chapel were saved and relocated to a university, but the structure itself vanished. Not all 20th century castle builders were so lucky to have their creation stand 90+ years. Some castles barely outlasted their owners. In the prosperous 1920s, Rennell Manor in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania was one such example. The estate's name, Rennell, is Eleanor spelled backwards, a playful tribute by its owner, Eleanor Widener Dixon, a member of the prominent Widener family. Built in 1926 on 114 acres near Philadelphia, Rennell Manor was a 50-room Tudor Revival palace designed by Horace Trumbauer. With 28 chimneys and lavish Tudor details, it emulated grand English manners. Eleanor and her husband Fitzeugene Dixon lived amidst its museum-quality interiors and extensive grounds. However, by the 1970s, the estate had passed from the family and faced commercial pressure. Local preservationists fought to save Rennell Manor. It was even declared a historic site, but to no avail. In 1974, a developer demolished the mansion. One bright spot: the manor's valuable leaded glass windows, including a set depicting the Magna Carta, were carefully salvaged before demolition and eventually donated to a restoration foundation. Those stained glass panels now shine in a museum, even though the great house that once encased them is gone. Some American castles fell victim not to the wrecking ball, but to flames. In the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts stood Shadowbrook, a mansion so large in story that it ranked as the second largest home ever built in the US, outpaced only by the Biltmore estate. Anson Phelps Stokes, a financier, commissioned this 100-room, Tudor collegiate Gothic castle in 1893. Later owners included Margaret Vanderbilt and the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who purchased Shadowbrook in 1917. By mid-century, the estate had been entrusted to the Jesuits for training priests. Then, tragedy struck on March 10th of 1956. A catastrophic fire swept through the wooden interior. Despite efforts to battle the blaze, the colossal house burned to the ground. All that remained were charred stone chimneys amid smoldering ruins. Shadowbrook's loss was widely mourned in the Berkshires. It symbolized the end of the Gilded Age lifestyle there. The Jesuits built a modern seminary building on the site a few years later, and today, a yoga retreat center occupies that newer structure. Interestingly, a few American castle builders themselves eventually chose to undo their grand creations. A case in point is Dr. Charles Paterno, a New York real estate developer. In 1905, Paterno constructed a romantic castle on a 7-acre tract atop Manhattan's Washington Heights, overlooking the Hudson River. Complete with a pergola, greenhouses, turrets, and a swimming pool, Paterno's 4-story mansion was a fanciful sight in uptown Manhattan. For a few decades, Paterno enjoyed his private Eden, commissioning a brag book of photographs titled The Castle to show off the lavish interiors and gardens. But by the 1930s, Paterno recognized that Manhattan's future lay in high-rise apartments, not private estates. As he grew older, spending more time at his Connecticut farm, the developer in him saw opportunity in the dirt under his own home. In 1938, Charles Paterno deliberately demolished his castle, blowing it up in a spectacular controlled demolition to clear the ridge for a new project. On the site, he built Castle Village, a set of luxury apartment towers that still stand along Riverside Drive. Thus, the castle's life ended at just over 30 years. On Manhattan's west side, another Gilded Age Titan's dream home filled a similar reasoning. Charles M. Schwab, the steel magnate, spent a fortune to create Riverside, his 75-room French chateau at Riverside Drive and 73rd Street. With pink granite walls and features borrowed from Loire Valley Chateau, Schwab's house was arguably the most opulent in New York. It had a bowling alley, a swimming pool, and multiple elevators, and occupied an entire city block. Yet society wags called it a white elephant because it stood on the wrong side of Central Park, an area then unfashionable for the very wealthy. Schwab himself fell on hard times after the 1929 stock crash, and by the late 1930s, he was eager to unload the costly estate. He even offered it to the city as an official mayor's residence, but Mayor LaGuardia famously declined. After Schwab's passing in 1939, the mansion sat mostly empty. It was subdivided into apartments during World War II and its grounds used as a victory garden, but by 1947, Riverside stood vacant and deteriorating. In 1948, it was demolished and replaced with a red brick high-rise apartment complex pointedly named Schwab House. In retrospect, America's Gilded Age castles were products of their time, grand gestures in an era of limitless optimism and unchecked wealth. Their demolitions, in turn, were often pragmatic responses to new realities. The cycle of opulence and obsolescence gives these vanished castles a certain poignancy. The story of America's lost castles is more than just a catalog of demolitions. It is a reflection of American society itself, ever-changing, sometimes wasteful, but always moving forward. The castles that once dotted our cities and countrysides may be gone, but their legends continue to captivate, reminding us of an age when Americans dared to live like kings, if only for a fleeting moment. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. If you could go back in time and save one of these castles, which one would you choose? Let me know down below in the comments section. My goal for this year is to reach 1 million subscribers. If you are among the 1 to 2 million monthly viewers of this channel who are not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and let's reach this goal together. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on This House.